Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of A Sip of Sunshine. I'm your host, Wadlow, and today we have a very special episode lined up for you. We have a number of members of the team here at Sunshine coming together to discuss the Children Commissioner Rachel D'Souza's recent plan published. It's called her Children's Plan, and it contains some really interesting bits of information, but also seems to be in contrast with some of the other stuff that we've heard from the Department for Education and the government. So we talk about this in great detail over the course of about an hour, and I hope you really enjoy it. If you have any questions on this particular topic, by all means comment on the podcast that you're watching, and we will absolutely do our best to answer them. Enjoy. Good morning, ladies. Thank you for joining me this morning for this roundtable discussion. Now, there's lots going on in our area, in our community at the moment, and I think it's so important that we try and talk about it because parents, teachers, anybody actually in our community, there's so much information for them to take on board. It is information overload, so they're feeling very overwhelmed at the moment. So I thought it'd be quite useful for us to validate by saying, yes, we have read the information and yes, there's a lot of it. But I think it's really important that we sort of create a little bit of clarity around all the discussions and maybe give some viewpoints as well. Now, we'll go through some initial introductions in a second, but I think before we do that, let's just summarize, or I will summarize, why we're chatting today. Roundtable discussion. The Children's Commissioner, Rachel D'Souza, she's recently published her Children's Plan, and it contains some really interesting information. And we're going to talk about this over the course of the next hour or so, but I think it's also important that we touch upon what our lovely Bridget Phillipson is saying at the moment through the media. Lots of unofficial reporting and nothing to back it up. So we'll have a chat about that. And of course, yesterday's parliamentary debate on the SEND legal rights of our children. So let's get started. Let's do some very brief introductions. Kaylee, would you like to introduce yourself?
I absolutely would. So my name is Kaylee. I work for Sunshine Support. A large part of my background has been working within schools, within education, and leading SEND within schools.
Brilliant. Thank you. Grace.
Good morning. Is it still morning? Yes. Good morning, everybody. I'm Grace. I'm also a SEND consultant at Sunshine Support. My background is in secondary school education, special needs and leadership. And also I am a parent of a child with really complex SEND needs. So I have navigated the SEND journey personally and professionally, which brought me to Sunshine Support.
Amazing. Lindsay?
Hi, I'm Lindsay and I'm education consultant at Sunshine Support. My background is I was a teacher for 26 years and 10 years an infant head teacher. So early years and infant is really my passion. Also a SEND parent and have managed to navigate all the way through to post 16.
Yeah. And last but not least, Michelle.
Hello, I'm Michelle, and I have a background of over 30 years working in various sort of places with SEND abroad and within the UK, and then became a lecturer. I am a stepmom to a couple of SEND youngsters, and they've navigated it through but had a difficult time. But I work within Lindsay's team, part of the education, but I'm also a SEND consultant.
Fabulous. What a team. What a team. So, and for those who don't know me, I'm Chrissa. I'm the mouthpiece here. I'm the founder of Sunshine Support, but I think you already knew that. So let's crack on with the Children's Commissioner's Children's Plan. So this is a really massive document, and I know that we've all spent time mulling over it, trying to unpick it, and we naturally read between the lines, or at least try to. Trying to understand the landscape of this a little bit. The report, I'm going to pick up on a few key themes because to go through all of it word by word is going to take, months. But the report says the schools are picking up the pieces because other services like CAMS and social care and housing support simply aren't there. Now, this particularly, feels very familiar as a conversational theme. But Lindsay, having led a school before, is this ringing true to you? Are schools being asked to do too much outside of their remit?
I think that's certainly how it feels in schools. And I think sometimes it's not always that those services aren't there. It's just that they're so difficult to access. And, because they struggle with their resourcing as well, they increase the thresholds for schools to be able to access any direct support. So yeah, absolutely. In my experience and the professionals that I still work alongside, the idea that teachers are becoming social workers, mental health workers, that expectation that they can manage that side of their role now is very real in schools. Yes.
And, Kaylee, this is probably very raw for you as well, having, not long left education. What does that mean for teachers? The fact that it's acknowledged, I'm sure, is fantastic. But in real terms, like Lindsay's just said, you're reaching out to CAMS, you're reaching out to different services, you're putting in SPOAs or reaching out to social care, whatever, and there's nothing there. So what is the actual day-to-day impact on the teachers?
I think more than anything, again, it's that demand and that expectation. It seems to be growing more than anything, really. And yet my background is in education, and actually in the latter half surrounding mental health, really, we were really lucky in our locality and in our area that we can access MHST, so the mental health support team in schools. But I think that's only happening around 50% at the moment, depending on, it's a little bit of a postcode lottery, I think, as well. I think for teachers there is a worry and there is a concern that their jobs are so much more wider than what people recognize. I think that that's part of it, but also that responsibility is huge when you become somebody who's involved with social care, mental health as well. It opens up different realms of, I think, responsibility for the teacher, that expectation, that demand, because that you're working with young people who require additional support. We can't necessarily be that person. We can't necessarily be trained in all of those different areas. So I think we need to rely on to be able to draw on that expertise, but obviously it needs to be available in order to do that. And I think that's my main worry, that the availability of the services needs to be what's at the forefront, because ultimately for teaching staff, education staff to do their jobs properly, to be able to do them justice for the child, they too need to access their own levels of support in order to be able to provide potentially what some of these young people need.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say something quite controversial, shock horror. But when the teachers went on strike, yeah, I'm going there. Now, I spoke to a lot of teachers. I know a lot of teachers personally, professionally. There's lots of us here, right? And I did not come across a single teacher who said to me, this is about wages. These strikes are actually about the support that we're receiving or not receiving, the resources that we're expected to provide when we are not skilled in these areas. And it was very much about their well-being, absolutely, but also the environments and expectations that they were expected to work within or towards. So bringing this up now in this report, that's got to be a good thing. Everybody agree? Or am I barking at the wrong tree?
It does validate to a certain extent the things that we've been saying for a long time. None of us went into teaching to go on strike. I purposefully joined a union when I started teaching that didn't go on strike, that do now, because for me it was something you didn't want to do. And reports like this do give you a certain amount of validation, but you turn into that sort of skeptical person again, where you say, well, we've been saying this for a long time, and what's really changed? And
Absolutely. And on that note, of course, this is not a change in law. I think one of the myths that I want to sort of, iron out here is a lot of people, are getting wound up thinking this is what it's going to be, that in this children's report and children's plan, this is set in stone. This is how it's going to roll. It's not. This is findings of a report. It doesn't actually say that anything's going to change, sadly, or, promisingly, I don't know. We'll come to that in a sec. Now, one of the other things then is that the report highlights that almost 40% of children will need additional learning support at some point. 1 in 4 will need a social worker. 1 million children live in destitution. Michelle, is this what we're actually seeing for real? Or, do you think that this is accurate? Does it feel accurate?
It feels accurate, but the problem is the report only went to 40% of the schools. So it doesn't actually identify a true picture of England itself at all. It's less than half of the schools. And which schools did they actually go to? That is not clear within the report. So it's not a true reflection when you actually look at the figures that they've produced and what they're saying, and then you actually look at how many schools we've actually got within England and how many children, then how many have got EHCPs, and and one thing I did notice as well is those that perhaps couldn't answer some of these questions, which was very interesting. Parents were allowed to answer the questions, and straight away they've identified that the parents' responses were negative compared to the children's. And that was a little bit worrying, because that's almost shutting down a voice, a very important voice, especially in the world of SEND.
Yeah. So then you won't wonder really whether the communication style was correct and suitable. Okay, it's very, very interesting. I noticed as well that the report leans very heavily on the data from the Big Ambition survey, doesn't it? And that's only 2% of the respondents of that were children with SEND. And early years, of course, weren't included. And so I suppose that undermines the evidence base as well. I mean, we've all done an element of study between us. And I know that when I was doing my master's, it was identified quite early on. When you're looking at research, you have to look at the data that was collected, how it was collected, the ethics involved in it, who funded it, that sort of thing. So really developing a full report on something that was so potentially skewed to start with, what are we thinking?
I think from what I've read, Chrissa, is that early years providers are quite hopeful.
Okay.
And I think what they've latched onto is this idea of early intervention, and they see themselves firmly in that position where they are the people that notice the early signs that a young person may be struggling. They're also the people who can use their own judgment to determine, is this something that's developmental, or could this be something that needs further looking into? So I think what the early years community are trying to do, although they do feel that perhaps their voice hasn't been as big as it could have been, is that they are seeking to see where they can position themselves. And I think that's crucial, and when we talk about early years, we've got to remember that is every person who looks after a preschool age child. So it's not just school nurseries, it's your private and voluntary sector as well, that it's a huge group of professionals that do feel like they haven't had a voice, but want to be heard and want to see themselves in that position where they have value in getting in there early and getting children the support that they might need even before they start school. And that would be great for schools, is that if some of those processes were already underway before the children started school at 4, 5, fantastic, let's work together and move this forward for the benefit of the child.
I think that's what gets lost a lot, isn't it? That focal point of the child. And it's quite interesting because I've seen quite a lot in the press just recently, where they focused a lot on children not being school ready. So this is where it's really going to come in, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting part of the report, is that sort of what they're calling reception plus, that idea that actually children might not be ready for school. Although I've used that word, sorry, that's a very strong word. I don't like the idea of children being school ready. I do think it's a two-way thing, and schools need to be ready for children, and children are changing, and schools at times can lag behind that shift that we're seeing. But putting that aside, yes, children start at the age of 4 or 5 in the UK, and some of them are not ready, but we've got to work with the child and meet them where they are when they walk through the school door. And then interestingly, there's this idea of this reception plus, so that perhaps after that 10 months in the reception year, some children may not be ready to progress into more formal learning, into Key Stage 1. And, that's I suppose as an infant head teacher in the past, that's the thing that's sort of rumbling around in my head, is what does that look like practically? What are the benefits for the children? What are the disadvantages for the children? What are the benefits for school and the disadvantages and the challenges? There's an awful lot to work out how the practicalities of these things are really going to work. And that's just a little area of this report. There's all the rest of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people are quick to forget the children starting school now, of course, were COVID babies. So, there will be, there's a huge amount of pressure on parents where they're saying, well, the reason that they're not school ready is because the parents are terrible and they've not taught them this and they've not taught them that. And I know that one of our staff was saying the other day that there was a message sent home that the children don't seem to know nursery rhymes in reception, and that's really, really sad. But I think that we need to remove that judgment, as we always say, and look at this with curiosity. It wasn't a case that parents were readily available to educate and connect with their child. A lot of families were hugely traumatized by the disconnect, by death, by health changes, by being, it's just a completely different lifestyle. I mean, none of us really want to go back to that, let's be fair. So when you're you've romanticized this vision of having a baby, bringing it into this beautiful world, having your partner at the side of you as your birthing partner, and that was all stripped away. And suddenly you're on your own and you're incredibly lonely and you're very traumatized and you haven't got your village to help raise your child in those early days. There will be an impact to that. And we're now seeing that impact coming through in the schools. So surely there needs to be more attention paid to that. Am I going mad in thinking that?
And I've had to draw local authorities' attention to that in a couple of meetings when we've been debating EHCs, and I've said, well, look, this child is a COVID baby. We have to look at the implications, particularly in terms of like communication and interaction, because they're very early experiences that we know are so important. Those really formative experiences were made with 1 or 2 adults, and there was no opportunity for socialization. So it's not necessarily that they are neurodiverse, it's that's how they've, you bring up anybody in isolation and they're going to struggle when you put them into a classroom full of 30 other children. Sort of, and it all kind of ties in with this idea of that school ready. And maybe not, I'm a fan of not looking at sort of those traditional benchmarks in terms of key stages with our children, because you soon learn when you have a child who's got an awful lot of complex needs that those things go out the window and they'll achieve what they achieve in line with. And I think that comes in early. I think it needs to be less of a stigma for those parents who say, actually, do you know what, my child does need another year. And it's no surprise that we've got more and more children coming through this year, particularly applying for EHCs, because they are the COVID babies. They are the children who were born in COVID. But that their needs, that their needs are no less real than a child who has, a more obvious diagnosis.
Absolutely.
But we shouldn't be surprised by that.
No, absolutely. So the commissioner then, she said that she wants a new digital children's plan, which is a single record showing a child's needs across education, health and care. On the surface, sounds quite promising. Michelle, is there any danger here though, or what are your thoughts?
There's danger because we've tried this particular sort of idea before. We seem to be going around in a circle, that we're going to digitalise everything. We're going to make sure that all services have access, yet we know children still fall through that net.
Yeah.
So there's no detail behind how they're actually going to roll that out. And we live in an environment that is very low on trust at the moment, and people don't want to give out those details. A lot of things are being stolen digitally. So parents are very wary of sharing some of that stuff. And they're also very fed up of telling their story over and over again. So we're in a catch-22 system. We've got a system that they want to put in place to support so everyone can get that information, but it's not a very safe system in this current environment, with the lack of trust of what will they do with that data, and will it be used correctly? Yeah. Or is it just a data collection exercise for further reductions? What we should be looking at is actually training, because I used to train Senkos, and by the time they got to me, they hadn't chosen to be a Senko. They were told they were going to be a Senko. They're already in burnout. They weren't given the time to do the job properly. So how are we going to have these people within education to support our young people and our children in an effective way? We've got beautiful NPQ come through, but that's only 75 hours. So if you thought burnout was heavy before, it's going to be really heavy now. And we're bringing in a lot more terminology in this new plan. I mean, education psychologists are going to get really confused with 2 EPs.
Oh, absolutely. So this is the new tiered system, isn't it? Where she's saying there's education plan, education and health plan, education and care plan, and then an EHCP.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. And if you are a teacher that's already in burnout, and haven't got the knowledge or the understanding, which is not your fault, you haven't been given the time to gain that. And then we've got everything online. Can we access it? Are we going on the same platform? Is every LA going to have the same platform? Because at the moment, every LA speaks a different language and has different, ideas, yet we're all going to be brought together. I'm sorry, I'm old enough to have known we've been here before. And we still aren't there. So I'm a bit concerned how we're going to get there.
Absolutely. And I think, when we're looking at inclusion, the whole point of inclusion is to remove barriers. And actually, this is now putting more barriers back in, because if you've got a child who originally had an education plan and they need to move to an education and health plan, how are they going to do that? That's going to be another thing that parents have to beg for and plan for and probably pay for. Whereas what I can't understand is how they can't just use an EHCP and leave the sections blank if you don't need them. Surely that's inclusion. You're just using the bits you need. So it seems a little bonkers, like you said, just going backwards to statements. That's what statements were, of education.
My concern is, or not concern necessarily, but I suppose in terms of clarity, a lot of conversations surrounding mental health and well-being of children and young people, in terms of that tiered approach, where is that going to fit? Because ultimately we know that social emotional mental health is a category of need within the Zen Code of Practice, but then if we're also going to have separate health and separate care, I don't want that to get lost anywhere. And I suppose my main worry is are we really, we're trying to build these education systems around supporting our young people. We want them to be able to attend, we want them to be able to engage, we want them to be able to, to thrive and succeed, whatever setting, whatever provision that is. And I suppose my worry is, although we're looking at a tiered approach, will there be some clarity and consistency of where certain needs and where certain aspects of that plan are going to feature? How do we determine whether mental health covers an E and an H plan, so education and health, whether it just stays in an education plan? I think there are things like that that need a little bit more clarity, I suppose. And I think we would all be concerned that nobody falls through that net, and how that is captured, because we know at the moment there's talk about children not losing their plans and things. Brilliant, but we also need to make sure that their needs are fully captured in one of those plans, potentially, if not an amalgamation of, which seems that we're just back to EHCP.
Isn't that what we've already got?
That's similar to what Michelle said, really. Yeah. I think it seems to be one step forward in some ways and then steps back in others. And it does feel like that movement is shifting between.
It's also the word should.
Oh, thank you.
EHCPs, those with EHCPs that have fought very hard for them, should keep them.
Should keep them, yeah.
Should is not good enough. You've already told us that they're hard to get and they've had to fight to get them, and then you throw in the word should.
Yeah.
Should stay, should be there, should be able to keep them. Well, that tells me that down the line, should's going to disappear.
And we've got additional needs as well in terms of language. That seems to be a golden thread throughout that. So that send seems to have dropped ever so slightly. We've got this band of additional needs, which again we know covers education, health and care. But I suppose your determination of what additional needs means, we need some guidance on that. And I think that's where some of the kind of terminology and definitions and things might be updated as per legislation. We don't know.
Yeah, there is definitely, it definitely runs the risk that not, all of these different codes of practice, legislation, regulation, guidance, they're all talking in a different language. And one of the things that I thought was brilliant about the SEND Reform 2014 was that it did bring it all under one roof, and it simplified it for parents, and it very much spoke the language, which is great for parents of children with neurodivergence, that actually education shouldn't be seen on its own. It should be that if you have a health or a care need that impacts education, that we bring it all into a legally binding plan. And there are still ways, of course, of getting health and care into specific sections so that they are legally binding. And it was one of the things, it's one of the reasons I set up Sunshine Support. My daughter had a 52-week waking day provision, and it was all paid for by education, even though it should have been tripart funded, but this was the way that we got it legally binding. I mean, we're going back a while now. I appreciate the health has got its own legally binding areas, but back then it didn't. So it was really useful to have everything in one place, and I could just refer to one document and I knew what was legally binding. I knew what she should have been receiving, and what she was receiving. So it's quite frustrating that, like you say, we've gone into this one system and now they're like, oh no, we're going to fragment it all off again. We need to remember, again, let's go back to, I'm very much champion for the parent voice. Parents are frazzled, they're burnt out. If they have neurodivergent children, let's be fair, there's a real strong possibility they are also neurodivergent. Executive function is an issue. So why are we adding more to them? The SEND Reform 2014 was all about making this accessible for parents. We know over time, local authorities have brought in big barristers to really bully parents at tribunals, which is why they need people like us to back them up and support them and represent them. That was never the aim, though. It was meant to be a parent-friendly, parent-led. you know, there are professionals out there, I know I'm surrounded by them here, that really see parents as the expert in their child. Are they a clinical expert? No, but they're an expert in their child. So we need to have their voice amplified. But this is just stifling them. It's like saying, coming in, there's support here, but now you've got to work out which door you've got to go through. And there are 52 doors, and you've got to pass several tests before you actually get into the door. That's not inclusion. So now, one of the things I want to pick up on is something you said, Kaylee, about children falling through the net, because it seems like there's layers of nets and we're not quite sure where the nets are. And so there may be enormous gaps. And we've seen mention of children with disabilities, you know, SEN, those in destitution, children, you know, like I say, with parents with needs of their own. And of course, the hot topic for us right now, children with attendance difficulties. You know, how on earth are they going to capture those groups adequately? Or is this just going to lead to more people being invisible and that's how they're going to drive costs down?
And I think that's the thing that isn't quite clear. I think the determination of the tiers, the criteria, the threshold, and like I've already alluded to, that's my main worry, that there are going to be children that don't quite meet any of those individually, but actually as a whole potentially. Yeah, I think we're in a very again, Michelle's alluded to it, that kind of low trust environment as well at the moment, where we just need a little bit more clarity. We need to be able to hold on to something, to know that our most vulnerable children, our children that are going through the process, our children that are just starting the process, they've all got a protective bubble. But again, as Michelle alluded to, there's a lot of terminology around should. And again, the change of different language, it does give us a feeling of unease, because usually for us, if we were to see those types of words when we want it to be quantified and specified, we would be wanting that to be changed in an EHCP, for example. So in the commissioner's plan and the reports, the fact that we're seeing those words already, I think potentially will give all of us a bit of fear about what that means for the future.
I think one of the areas where I saw hope was around that idea of additional needs is necessarily special educational needs, and it isn't necessarily a diagnosis of a SEN need, and the idea that actually some young people might need additional support through a transient time in their life, you know, and it did emphasize that schools, it's actually said know your cohort better, which I think is a bit insulting to schools, because I think on the whole schools do really know their cohort well, but it did include, you know, young people who are carers, and really knowing who goes home and doesn't have time for homework because they're actually caring for somebody else, who's bereaved in your cohort, you know, who's living with that might need support, perhaps through an EP, an education plan, for a short period of time, but then might move out of that system. Interestingly, it also said that only 60% of schools couldn't give a figure for bereavement. So that's probably an area where, you know, schools aren't gathering that sort of information, as perhaps with older children who are experiencing that. And then those children who are living, you know, in unsuitable conditions at home, you know, and they're living very unstable lives once they leave the school building, and that they may need some extra support. So I kind of saw hope in that broadening of the terminology to additional needs. But again, it's like, how does that work in principle?
Yeah.
And
It
what
needs
does
to be completely separate. You know, EHCPs, I think, is very clear. The law is very clear. The legislation, the regulations, the guidance, all of it is very straightforward. The difficulty, I know that we see it day in, day out, is holding local authorities to account for whatever reason. We won't go into that today. But I think this extra layer of support for potential short-term problems, they may lead into other problems. Many local authorities, remember when they rolled out My Support Plan or My Plan or whatever, every local authority was different. This was essentially what that was about. That was about capturing additional needs that didn't quite, perhaps, they may have, reached the threshold for an EHC needs assessment. So actually we're just again regurgitating an old message. And one of the things that's alarmed me is that there is a constant theme of, and rightly so, before I start, of the support that's needed is outside of the classroom. So in other words, stop blaming the teachers, they're doing all they can. I agree with that, right? I absolutely agree. But that outside of the classroom has been interpreted two different ways. Now, initially, I interpreted it as social care, CAMS, health care. Yeah. But I've noticed that there are some very interesting comments online from head and maths, people who aren't on the ground with the kids and the families, but they're very much up there in their very posh office, driving their posh cars and helicopters or whatever. No judgment. But they're saying that actually outside the classroom to them means parents. So yes, we need parents to step up. We need parents to do this. The problem in education is the parents. Now, I'm very well aware, and it's well documented that I've said this. I do think that the government is orchestrating this message so that the media divide us, because instantly our backs are up when people say that. Likewise, they're capturing parental voices who are very much, damning teachers. So it's fracturing the little people on the ground so that it weakens us. But when have you got thoughts on this outside the classroom business, anybody?
I kind of interpreted that more as the external services. But I can see what you're saying from both perspectives, both as the educator and also as the parent, because it kind of comes back to what Lindsay was saying about the idea of additional as opposed to special needs. When I was an educator, when I was first starting out in teaching, I was almost anti-diagnosis. Oh, you don't need to, I don't need a diagnosis to be able to meet this child's needs in the classroom. I'll meet their individual needs. But then as a parent, my God, you need that diagnosis just so that you can understand your child better. And when I read the report and she talked about additional needs and children not needing diagnoses for support, well, yeah, that absolutely should be the case, but it also felt a bit like diagnosis shaming almost.
Yeah.
And I don't like that, because a lot of the time parents need that clarity and that validation to know it's not all their fault.
Yeah.
And I agree completely. There is this absolute wish to set us apart and push these two forces. And how often do we start working with a family who say the relationship with the school is completely broken down, we can't talk to them anymore, they just keep telling us they're doing a mass referral and they've opened a ladder on this? And how often is that our main piece of work, is to try and bring these families together? So it doesn't matter how many amazing outside services you can bring in or how brilliant the plans are, if you don't have all those constituent parts being able to work together, it won't succeed, because it's not succeeding now for everybody.
And we can't trust that every teacher's like you. Well, you took a
that's-
very human-centered
they're not all-
approach. Yeah.
They're not all that way, and not everybody is in it or
No.
supported either for the right reasons.
And teachers are just like anyone else. You get bad and you get good. That's the whole point, right?
Very hard to get rid of a bad teacher.
Yeah, good old HR.
It's very hard.
But at the same time, not every head teacher is Lindsay, and I can speak on with personal experience of Lindsay being a head teacher, because she was my children's head teacher. That trickled down. It trickled down to us anyway. We felt that inclusion trickle down, but not all head teachers are like that. And so you get a bad one come in who's not about inclusion, and they are all about, parents these days wanting diagnoses. That does eventually trickle down even to the good ones, because they have to then fight that person. They have to fight that person for inclusion. So it's just a bit of a mess. So I understand the need to try and streamline things, but you do fall into, then you're taking autonomy away from teachers who are highly skilled and very passionate, because of the ones who can't do it. So everybody's being punished. Now, one of the concerns that has been fed through to us, and Kaylee, I'm coming to you on this one because I know that it's affected the families that you support. The sort of question of, it doesn't seem worth it. I'm not going to bother applying for an EHCP because I don't even know whether my child will qualify anymore. Talk to us about that.
So I think in some of the reports, some of the key things that parents had taken from that was, I think there was mention at points about a single threshold around needs assessment, but actually if there's going to be multiple in tiers, tiered plans, if you like. So there was concerns around that. There was concerns about obviously the current legal test in terms of the criteria and the threshold for meeting EHC at the moment for our local authorities. Would that still stand potentially? Will there be a change in legislation? Will that kind of move forward? I think parents are in a very difficult position at the moment because whilst all of this have kind of been released, I think there's a lot of anxiety around it and there just isn't enough clarity for them. So thinking about what we know that currently, you know, nothing's bound by law or changed by law at the moment, but with this being released, I think it does put a fear into our parents thinking, well, what will this mean for my child? Because I'm not quite sure which tiered plan they would fit into. I'm also not quite sure what that threshold or criteria would be. I don't want to have to go through this process for you know, another 6 months potentially or thereafter, for something more solid to come out, really. So I think there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of worry amongst our parents, but not just for those that haven't got EHCPs, but those that currently have, which again Michelle alluded to earlier, because just being told no child should lose their plan or there should be a protection, and you know, if you're going through the process at the moment, you should be in that protective bubble. Again, I think it's not strong enough to say it will, you are, it's okay. It's, we're not sure what it looks like at the moment, but it should be okay. And for some of our parents, that terminology should isn't enough.
Yeah, completely understand that. And the irony in all of this, Lindsay, I'm going to come to you next because, of course, you run our SEND Training Institute, which is our offer to the teachers and the educators. The irony in all of this, that, you know, that the language being used feels quite protective of teachers, which is fabulous. But this big plan, this digital plan, all the tiered layers and everything else, isn't that just going to be another massive admin burden on educators?
It does sound that way, yeah. Or you know, particularly on the Senkos, and I think as Michelle mentioned earlier on, the Senkos are often teaching. You know, they are very rarely fully released from teaching responsibilities, so they're already overwhelmed with the system as it is. They've got to learn these new processes. They've got to translate that into something that every member of staff in school could understand what their part in it is, which isn't just teachers, it's the role of the teaching assistant and how they feed information into these new plans and how they'll be reviewed, how frequently they'll be reviewed is all a little bit up in the air. So the administrative burden, it will always be a concern when anything like this is introduced for schools. It does talk about there being funding, and it does talk about, as a positive, specialist training for teachers, which, you know, but again, it's when does that happen? Where does the time come? Where does the release money come so that the right people can access that? So yeah, there'll be a lot of question marks over that.
And, you know, I want to bang my head against the brick wall, or on the table or against anything really, in frustration, because did we not learn our lesson from watching the Welsh system and their ALN reform, where the pressure now placed on the schools where they have to have, they're called ALNCOs or Lencos, you know, their additional learning needs coordinators, same as our Senkos, are now supposed to be completely dedicated to managing this process in a school. No extra funding given for that. They have to hold the lower sort of level, lower needs IDPs, same as our EHCPs in England. They have to hold them within the school. To my knowledge, no extra funding for that. You've got parents applying to the school. The school might say no. What do you do then? I mean, we do know, but I'm not going to make this into an IDP thing. You then have to go to the local authority. Then at one point, I remember when they first rolled it out, it looked like, and they've ironed this out now, but it looked like you could have 2 open appeals, one with the school against a school, one against the local authority. Is any of this helpful? Why are we not learning? Because none of that helped. None of it has helped with our Welsh families. We support a lot of Welsh families, and they've just now got new problems as a result of the ALN reform. So I want to come on as well and talk about Bridget Phillipson. I say it with a smile on my face. I don't know why. I'm sorry. Because she wants to reset the SEND system. Oh, God. Oh, talk about banging your head against a brick wall. So I don't know who she's listening to, because there are a lot of loud voices. I mean, yesterday they were campaigning outside Parliament. They had very clear messages on those boards. They're all holding up together. The message is very clear from the SEND community, and parents, my God, they are powerful and they're loud and they are just brilliant. I love being part of this community, but it doesn't sound like they're being listened to. Does anybody have any opinion on who is influencing or shaping these bold statements that Bridget Phillipson is coming out and saying in the press?
She comes out with them all on her own because she just seems to do it so well. You know, it does sometimes feel like Bridget Phillipson against the world, and she apportions blame to everyone and everything parent-wise. You know, if children aren't going to school, it's the parents and they need to make their children more resilient, but has no intention of telling us how to do that or understanding why our children can't go to school. She's very short-sighted in her philosophy of SEND, and that a few short interventions will make a difference. They might do in the short term, but we know that our children have long-term needs, and she doesn't seem to factor that in anywhere. It's all about the here and now and getting them in the classroom. Okay, get them in the classroom, and then what?
You can tick a box.
Wonderful. Yeah, tick a box. It is. It's all about inclusion in the worst possible way. You know, I remember going back to the years where it was all inclusion meant just everybody in the same classroom, regardless of whether their needs would ever be met. And it feels like that's what they're going back to now. You're limiting specialist provision. You're trying to make that back to the special schools that we don't want anymore. By throwing everyone back into the same melting pot, but that means nobody's needs are met. And as a SEND parent, that's terrifying, because those EHCPs give you that option of finding the right provision for your child. But Bridget Phillipson wants us all back in the same classroom, but without the help. I
think there's some areas of contradiction, which again, I'm all about clarity. I need to know how we're moving forward. And so going back to the SEND reforms, you know, 2014, 2015 code of practice, it was all about the right support at the right time in the right place. And actually she alluded to that in one of her speeches that she did. So again, it kind of feels like we're moving between what was once. Actually, it's still what we want now, but the way in which it's done is where the clarity is needed, I think, because I think she'd said, you know, bringing together the right support at the right place at the right time, which you know, is very historic in terms of those initial SEND reforms, which I think is a shared goal for everybody. But then I think, again, there are concerns linked to the Commissioner's report, and what Lindsay said and what Michelle said, the strain on teachers, the strain on SENCOs. I was a SENCO that taught 50% of my timetable. And I worry then about the uptake of the MPQ SEN, which Michelle obviously talked about as well. So the training then of our future SENCOs, the training of our future teachers, which again, Bridget Phillipson did allude to, and she started talking about boosting SEN content within an initial teacher training. All of that sounds wonderful, but again, it's somewhere we've been before. It's somewhere where we've you know, we've wanted it to happen. We've asked for it to happen, and to a certain extent, in certain pathways in certain universities, that teacher training and that shaping of SEND does happen. So it feels like touching on things that are in the process, but also things that are quite solid in terms of that overall goal. And it just feels a little bit a step in between, I suppose, for in both sides of that reform, 2014, 2025 or 2026. It feels like we're very much seesawing between the two.
I also think that it's the only job in the world you don't have to be qualified for. So you're misinformed. You actually have probably never worked or been in that environment, and you are picking up on those buzzwords and just running with them, and you're not informed. And unfortunately, that's how I see our Bridget, really. It's, she needs to spend a whole month in a school to find out exactly what it's like, and to speak to parents and to speak to the young people and children to get a real idea of what is actually happening at base level. Because I'm sorry, any politician going into school for a media stunt, which is what it feels like, and sitting there with a smile, and when we know the children are off curriculum when that happens, there's no teaching going on when that happens. And I've been in that situation, and I was supposed to hide a young person so that they didn't come out and verbally say what they thought.
Hide them when Ofsted are in. It's all the troubled kids home.
Like I've always said, being a politician, it's the one job you can do that you're not qualified for. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
Crazy.
Seeing that real picture is absolutely vital, because you said it's just a photo opportunity. She's not spending time with them. She's going and she's asking questions, and you're absolutely right, they're cherry picking who goes in front of her. So Michelle, tell me something. If you were to put, this is a really big question, I'm really sorry to put you on the spot, but if you were to put the Commissioner's report next to, mutterings and utterings from the D of E and Bridget Phillipson, are we seeing something that is joined up, or is it just looking extra worrying?
It's just looking extra worrying. It's not joined up at all. The Commissioner's report takes her to the end of her tenure, and it identifies that it's going to be, because of that trust environment, it's going to be brought in at a very slow pace. We could have a change of government by the time this comes through, or even works through. And there is, looking at the reports that have come out recently, the only thread that actually links them together that I can see is the fact that it is keeping children in school regardless. And that accountability on schools at a local level for attendance and engagement and attainment. Once again, it's figures. Children aren't figures. Children don't sit in boxes. They're all unique. And actually what we need to do is let the teachers teach, and stop telling them what they've got to do. Give them a broad, balanced curriculum, and don't worry about the figures. Because if we get too hooked up on figures, especially teachers, and having to sorry, we've now got to chase this child because they've not been to school. Yes, that's a safeguarding issue. But if we are having to collect all that data all the time, that impacts their ability and their time to teach.
Absolutely. We're going around in circles with it all, aren't we?
We absolutely are going. But that is the common thread throughout what they've released recently, is accountability.
Well, as well, I find with the Commissioner's report, a lot of it's kind of that blue sky thinking, but it's all based on massive assumptions. Firstly, to do with education, so you can bring in the likes of Bridget Phillipson, but where's streeting in all of this? Where's health and social care? Where are they saying what they will pledge in terms of making these things happen? Because health and social care isn't just about hospitals. This is a huge part of this. So to me, so much of this comes from a good place, potentially. you know, I was really pleased to read stuff about stuff to do with engaging with virtual schools and things, massive services that are in place that are being undervalued, the use of premium and premium plus being revolutionized. Fantastic. Do those things can be done, but too much of this is reliant on far too big forces coming together that are already fighting against one another, and it just makes me feel more unsafe as a parent and as a professional.
Yeah, there's just too much uncertainty. And, you know, to refer back to the COVID times, one of the things that we can all collectively say is that the uncertainty was what got us, because we couldn't give our children answers. We couldn't give ourselves answers. And now you've got this you've got a community who is, yes, affected by COVID. There's a lot of that in our community. We know that. But also beyond that, you've got a community who feels let down. Like you said, trust is a huge problem. It's non-existent. We're constantly speculating. What do they mean by that? And you know, it's sending us wappy, let's be fair. We're exhausted by speculation. We're exhausted by reading between the lines. So you've got a very traumatized community. Now, if you went to a trauma specialist, they would say safety is key. Making further changes is not key. Like that's not going to help here. That's absolutely not going to settle everybody down. And I think society at the moment, not that I want to get into politics and what is happening out there, but again, doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on, it feels that we are being stripped from one another. We've all got very bold opinions. There is a lot of judgment. There is a lot of segregation, even if it's just in our thought patterns and our opinions. It just feels like the government's coming in to do that again with us. And I think it's worrying. I think it's really worrying for no matter who you are. Like you said, this is one opportunity here where teachers and parents really need to be on the same page and working together, because we're all going to be affected. And then, like, the third thing then in our little roundtable today is, of course, yesterday a big thing happened. There was a big debate in Parliament on the petition that was titled Retaining Legal Right to Assessment and Supported Education for Children with SEND. Now, another name for us to now refer to, Georgia Gould, who is the new Minister of State for School Standards. Again, there's so many fragments of people involved and so many spokespeople, but nothing seems to be joined up. She's pledged that there will always be a legal right to additional support for children with SEND. Okay. What does that mean? That it doesn't really clarify. Did anybody read this or watch it?
She was also just reiterating a message that was released about 3 weeks ago when IPSI challenged the government, and they came back with virtually the same thing, word for word. Children will always have a legal right. She's been in role for how long? She's been doing this job for a very short time. There are some principles, yes, the idea of children's voices being heard and prioritized, great, love that. And the idea that special educational needs children shouldn't have to travel miles to go to schools, brilliant, absolutely, that is listening. But again, it comes from, where is this informed from, and what guarantees are they willing to make? And until, the thing is, I feel like this is all just treading water. All of this, even D'Souza's report, we're all waiting for that white paper. And all this does is, it's wonderful that we had this voice. You know, we all signed this petition. We were all watching it at 4:30 last night. It's brilliant that we were able to have this platform. And I felt so encouraged by the number of MPs who spoke out in our defence. That was amazing. But the actual upshot of what was said, it's just holding us. We're in a holding pattern until that white paper comes out. None of this really means anything. No, sorry if that's me being my pessimistic.
No, I think you're being realistic.
It's very similar to the SEND reform, isn't it? We were held and we were held and we were held. So it feels very similar to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, you know, it always does feel like lip service, doesn't it? And you're right, Grace, you know, until we see that white paper, it's going to be really tricky for us to understand what on earth is going to happen in future. One of the things I wish, you know, if I could sit in front of, and actually I'm going to be sitting in front of an MP this week, so I will be mentioning this, but if I could sit in front of them, I would say, please stop drip feeding these things through to the media, because it's sending us all into a spin, which isn't helpful for anybody. And it's just creating further confusion, anger, fear, trauma. None of that is good.
It's not. I think I'm trying to think of an analogy, and it's almost like if you were an author writing your book, you wouldn't release all of your research and your ideas before you actually published your book. You would wait and let your readers read the book. And I think what we're being given is the footnotes to something that is highly anticipated. And it's just making people jump to their own conclusions, which then becomes misinformation because information spreads so quickly. And that's what I'm mindful of. And it's why quite often when things come online, you think, well, I just want to sit with this for a moment before I pass comment, because it is being talked about like this is what is going to happen. And actually we don't know that, and that's not helpful. But it's also the way of the world now that this information is all readily available. So the media feeds it to us and our anxiety levels go up. And then I bet we haven't got a date for the white paper. So we still don't know at what point we're going to get some clarity.
This could be years.
Sorry, Chris. No, I was going to say, I think that's why it's really important that you have organisations like us, so that people, because I agree, when I see these things come out, I go to trusted places for advice, and I'll, like you, I'll take a step back and read the things. But what worries me about the whole white paper thing is I feel at the moment that it's all about EHCPs, so that when it does come to it, when the white paper's published and they get rid of them, we can all go, oh yeah, well, we knew that was going to happen. I feel like we're being managed, and I don't like that. Sorry, Chris, I interrupted you there.
No. I absolutely agree. And I think, you know, I worry that there's not going to be a right of reply, a right of appeal, because they're not showing any signs that they're listening to the people that they're meant to be serving. And they need to remember that they are public servants. They are meant to be serving the public. And it worries me. But I think one of the key notes that we have continued to put out there through our socials, through all of the messages that we've shared, is to try not to react. It's really hard. It's really hard. We can respond, but to react takes such a lot of energy, and it really bashes our nervous system. And you know my views on all of this. You know, it's hard, particularly if you're neurodivergent, to not react to these things, and also to not misread, because I've misread a few bits and I've gone, what? And then I've reread it and gone, oh, no, that bit's okay. Because we're in rage. We're waiting for the next thing to drop that we need to get annoyed about. But pausing with it, seeking out these sorts of conversations to feel validated, I think is absolutely crucial. So just briefly then, I've got one last question for all of you. I'm going to come to you individually. If you had the Secretary of State in front of you tomorrow, what one change would you demand to protect children's rights? Michelle, sorry to throw you in there.
Well, we've already got rights of children. I'd like that to be more secure, really. And I would like children to know that they've got rights. It's not taught as strongly in schools as it should be. And that's what I would like them to adhere to. They signed up to the UN rights of children, but they're not following it. So that's what I would like them to stick to.
Spot on. Grace, what do you think?
Thank you. I'm glad you didn't leave it till last. I think I would like to see continuity, particularly with the forces. We've not spoken much about, actually, Chris. I'm surprised. Local authority. I think we could get so much further with our own children and with the children that we support if there was more consistency. And there is law, and we know we quote that law every day, and we need that to be enforced, particularly in the local authorities, because we're telling parents it's the local authority from section 19 who are responsible for making sure your child has alternative provision, and they'll be like, well, why aren't they getting it? I can't tell you that because it's not being enforced. So for me, it would be making sure that there is more consistency and enforcing that the local authorities do as they are directed and meant to.
Yeah, I think that accountability is key, and I have put that message out there a lot, that the law is brilliant, like you both said. It's great. You just need to stick to it. And is that a funding issue? Is it a resources issue? I mean, we could go on, but I think that's where the focus needs to be. Kaylee, what would you ask for?
I think my main concern still sits with kind of the professionals and the SENCOs, just as much as it is the parent and the child, but from an educational perspective. And I think a lot of the terminology that is used around scrutiny and accountability and all of those things, I think ensuring that we've got support for our professionals that are working in that field is so incredibly important as well. Because again, Lindsay's alluded to it, we want to retain teachers, we want to retain SENCOs, because that gives consistency to our children. So what can we be doing at other levels to ensure that the support that we want for our children, we've also got to ensure that the training and support is in place. So the thing that I would want is that assurance that in terms of staff wellbeing, staff retention, staff training, continuing professional development, but also well-being and understanding of those expectations. But some of those words that have been kind of darted around scrutiny, accountability, rigorous, demand, all of those sorts of things, again, I think that adds to that. I'm already a teacher, and I'm already pastorally working with the children, I'm already involved with school nurse, school counsellor, I'm already doing all of these things. I want to ensure that I can still be a teacher at the end of the day, as well as obviously do the pastoral side of the work. So I think more than anything, it's about that empowerment of our educational staff to be able to do the job well, but ultimately they need to have their own levels of support and tiered levels of support in order for them to do that. So yeah, mine would be more around kind of ensuring that those foundations are in place so it can filter down to our children and young people. So from the people on the front line as such, working with and ensuring that they've got the support to do the jobs that they are doing so well, but without resourcing and funding and things like that.
Brilliant. And Lindsay, I've saved you till last. What would you ask for?
I think if we're talking in terms of children's rights, I think for me it would be the right to choose and to explore what educational path is right for them and what provision is right for them. I think they need to, I'd like to see that school wasn't a linear process, and perhaps that idea of reception plus is a little stepping stone to acknowledging that we can't all remain on the conveyor belt that is the current school system. And I'd like young people to have the right to step off that conveyor belt and move into education that looks different if that's right for them.
Absolutely. Because the thing is, in employment, we are afforded the opportunity to choose a workplace that fits for us. For some people, it is working in a call center with 2,000 other people, but that's very rare that somebody chooses that because it looks like school. So, at Sunshine, we have very hybrid working. Some people work at home, some people work in the office, some people do both, some people work in a sensory tent. Whatever, the work gets done. That's the main aim, right? So it really frustrates me that they're setting kids up for what? I don't know. So I completely agree. So, oh, well, I mean, we could have talked for hours and hours and hours more on this topic. And I'm sure that this is not going to be the end because there's more to come. And we're constantly poised, ready for action. But for today, thank you all so much for being part of this roundtable discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And we will be back very, very soon with more. I hope you enjoyed that bonus podcast episode. I found it absolutely intriguing. If you need any help, please do reach out. Don't suffer in silence. You can contact us at www.sunshine-support.org. I'll be back next month with another episode of A Sip of Sunshine. I look forward to presenting it to you then.